April 1945. The war in Europe was collapsing. Columns of exhausted civilians and retreating soldiers clogged the roads of Western Germany. Among them were young women in worn uniforms, signal operators, medics, clerks, who had once believed the war would never reach their door. It did. When U.S. forces overran their town, the resistance lasted less than an hour. By afternoon, white flags hung from shattered windows. The women were ordered to assemble in the town square. No shouting, no chaos, just firm instructions in a language many barely understood. They were searched for weapons, their papers taken, and then escorted toward a waiting convoy of military trucks. One of them, 19-year-old Anna Keller, whispered to the girl beside her, "Where are they taking us?" No one answered. The trucks drove for hours. When they finally stopped, the women saw something that made their stomachs drop. Rows of tall wire fencing glinting in the evening light. Guard towers, floodlights, wooden barracks, a temporary prisoner processing camp. The gates opened, and they walked inside. The gates closed behind them with a metallic echo that no one would ever forget. Inside the wire stood long wooden tables under hanging lamps. American military police directed them into lines. The atmosphere was strict, but controlled. No shouting, no chaos, just procedure. One by one, the women stepped forward. Names were written down, ranks recorded, personal belongings collected and tagged. Wedding rings were not taken. Small photographs were allowed. Anything considered military intelligence was removed. Anna watched as her identification card was placed into a folder stamped PWW, Prisoner of War. That was the moment it became real. They were no longer signal operators, nurses, clerks. They were detainees of a collapsing regime. After registration, they were escorted toward a fenced compound separated from the male prisoners. The enclosure was surrounded by double rows of barbed wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, silhouettes against the darkening sky. Some of the women expected shouting, insults, revenge. Instead, there was silence. American guards stood watch, rifles slung, faces expressionless, professional, distant. A medic walked past, glancing over the group to assess their condition. A translator explained the rules. Stay inside the marked boundary. Meals twice daily. Medical treatment available. No one leaves without authorization. The rules were spoken calmly. Still, the fence felt enormous. That night, they were issued rough wool blankets and directed into wooden barracks with narrow bunks stacked 3 high. The boards creaked with every movement. Someone began to cry quietly. Not from pain, from the weight of understanding. They were alive. They were safe. But they were no longer free. Anna lay awake staring at the ceiling beams. Outside, a searchlight swept slowly across the compound, casting long shadows through the cracks in the wood. She whispered into the darkness, "This is our new reality," and no one disagreed. The siren sounded before sunrise, not loud enough to terrify, but sharp enough to remind everyone where they were. For a brief second, Anna forgot. She thought she was back in her hometown, waking for morning duty at the signal office. The wooden ceiling above her looked unfamiliar, but her mind tried to make sense of it. Then she heard the boots outside, the roll call, the fence. Reality returned all at once. The women climbed down from their bunks in near silence. The air inside the barracks was cold and heavy. Condensation clung to the inside of the small windows. The wool blankets, rough and thin, had done little against the night chill. Outside, the compound was gray and misty. Floodlights were turning off as pale dawn replaced them. A guard tower stood still against the morning sky. They formed lines. Names were called again. Numbers confirmed. No one missing. For the first time, the women could clearly see the camp in daylight. Double rows of barbed wire, a narrow strip of cleared earth between fences, guard towers at measured intervals, other compounds in the distance, separate, fenced. It felt organized, controlled, permanent. A field kitchen truck arrived shortly after roll call. Tin cups were distributed. A ladle of thin but hot coffee substitute was poured into each one. Later, bread rations followed. No one spoke at first. Some of the women had expected anger, revenge, public humiliation. Instead, the atmosphere was procedural, distant, impersonal. But the fences were real. Rumors began quietly. They will send us east. No, west. They'll question us. They'll release civilians. No one truly knew. Anna noticed something she hadn't expected. The guards were not watching them with hatred. They were watching them with caution, the same expression used for any prisoner. It was not comfort, but it was not cruelty either. Later that morning, a medical inspection was announced. A U.S. Army medic, accompanied by a translator, entered the compound. The women were checked for illness, wounds, exhaustion. One girl fainted from dehydration. She was carried carefully to the medical tent. That moment unsettled everyone more than anything else, because it meant this was not chaos. This was administration. This was a system. And systems lasted. As the sun rose higher, Anna walked near the inner fence. Beyond it, she could see open countryside, fields untouched by barbed wire, so close, yet unreachable. She placed her hand near the cold metal, not touching it, just close enough to feel its presence. For the first time, she understood something clearly. The war was ending, but for them, a different chapter had just begun. 3 days later, the questioning began. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just methodical. Small groups were escorted to a wooden administration hut outside the inner compound. A translator sat beside an American officer with a folder of documents. They were asked simple questions: name, role, where they had served, whether they had witnessed crimes. Some answered quickly, some hesitated. Some stared at the table, realizing that the war they had believed in had collapsed faster than they ever imagined. It wasn't the questions that changed them. It was the information. During one session, a translator spoke carefully. The war is effectively over in this region. Berlin is surrounded. Germany is surrendering in stages. Silence followed. The words felt unreal. For years, propaganda had promised victory, strength, destiny. Now, the reality was this: barbed wire, guard towers, a new authority. When Anna returned to the compound, the others gathered around her. What did they say? She hesitated. Then she answered quietly, "It's over." That evening, something shifted. The fear of immediate violence had faded days ago. Now it was replaced with something heavier: uncertainty about the future. Would they be released? Repatriated? Held for months? No one knew. As the sun set, the floodlights flickered on again. The wire fences glowed faintly in the artificial light. Anna stood near the barracks and looked toward the guard tower. An American soldier leaned against the railing, scanning the perimeter. He looked tired. So were they. For the first time, she understood something clearly. They were no longer enemies in battle. They were survivors of a finished war, standing on opposite sides of the same fence. The wire still separated them, but the war that built it was ending. And beyond the fences, a different world was already beginning.